battlefield has stopped screaming. For a moment, just a moment, the cannons sleep. The Vox chatter dies. No mortars, no flares, no Vox-bark charges. The ground no longer groans beneath impact. What's left behind is the kind of silence that doesn't soothe, doesn't bring peace. It hangs in the dirt like a second atmosphere. Somewhere a low stick burns too long in a shaking hand. A guardsman squints through half-lidded eyes, not looking at anything, because there's nothing to see that isn't already burned into him. This is rest. In the Astra Militarum, this is what they get. There is no retreat in the way civilians imagine it. No barracks lit by soft lumens, no warm meals rationed with smiles, no arms thrown around shoulders in celebration. There is only this in-between space, this grey zone where the firing stops but the war doesn't end, a kind of purgatory between offensives, and in that purgatory they wait. These interludes vary. On the voidships of battle fleets, it might mean being rotated into deep hull corridors, bunked two to a cot with nothing but cogitator maintenance shifts and rationed recaf. On planetside campaigns, it could mean garrison duty in ruined hab blocks, or being ordered to stand perimeter watch around a manufactorum crater so irradiated it makes teeth loosen. Rest, in most cases, simply means no one is actively trying to kill you for the next 3 hours, maybe 4, and that's if you're lucky. Across the endless war fronts of the Imperium, on Cadia before the fall, on Armageddon, in the catacombs of Vraks, and the quagmire of Vervenhive, rest and recuperation, R&R, isn't a concept, it's a rumour. A promise made in Imperial propaganda pict feeds, whispered across voxnets to calm panicked regiments. In reality, R&R is a logistical manoeuvre, not for the benefit of the guardsmen, for the benefit of the war machine. It exists to prevent collapse, not to offer care. In Ghostmaker, Dan Abnett's Tanith first and only briefly linger on a world that's not trying to kill them. There's no peace in those chapters. Just haunted men surrounded by the absence of orders. They clean their flak. They play cards. Some write letters that won't be mailed, because no courier survived the last bombardment. One trooper carves names into his gear with a vibroblade. Another stares at a wall for hours, unblinking, daring it to speak first. This is rest. It's not healing. It's suspension. The Ciaphas Cain memoirs, curated by the Inquisition and spiked with equal parts satire and self-preservation, offer a contrasting lens. On fleet ships or at rear command stations, Cain describes R&R with more familiarity. Mess halls, reassignment processing, Vox messages sent to loved ones, if you're high-ranked or lucky enough to have survived intact. But even there, rest is half a lie. Cain knows that at any moment, the Munitorum may issue redeployment orders, or a Tyrannid bioship might surface from the void, and suddenly downtime becomes a memory burned away by bolter fire. Even luxury is another theatre of war. And then there's Vraks. 17 years of trench war. The death corps of Krieg rotated units for rest every few months. Not to recover, but to dig deeper. Bunkers, mass graves, ammo stockpiles. Every moment not spent firing a lasgun was spent building something to outlast the next barrage. R&R for the Kriegers was being allowed to live long enough to rebuild what had been obliterated. No mess halls, no leisure, just different orders, and they obeyed. So what is R&R in the Guard? It's the silence between thunder. It's the moment you realize your squad is gone, and you're the only one breathing. It's 20 seconds in a crater, clutching your flak jacket, when nothing explodes nearby, and that almost feels like safety. It's when a Medicae tells you you're stable enough to return to duty, and you pretend to be relieved. It's the difference between exhaustion and death, that's all. And for the Imperium, that's enough. Behind this grim calculus is the hidden truth. Humanity cannot afford rest. Not in this millennium. Not in this galaxy. The Imperium of Man fights across 1,000 simultaneous fronts. Every regiment relieved from battle must be replaced. Every ship that returns must bring reports, wounded, salvage. The Adeptus Administratum tracks these exchanges with precise cruelty, ensuring no soldier idles longer than the machine spirit allows. You don't earn your rest, You get assigned it, and you better use it to sharpen your bayonet. For the viewer, understand this. R&R in the Astra Militarum is not designed for the guardsman's benefit. It is not moral. It is not kind. It is an operational pause to make the next operation possible. And yet, in those moments, something fragile endures. A scribbled note to a mother. A half-smoked IHO stick shared under a Lehman Russ shadow. A dream that lasts 4 minutes before the alarm. These moments, tiny and breakable, are the only proof the Imperium's soldiers are still human. And then the thunder returns, and they answer it. Rest doesn't begin when the gunfire stops. It begins when someone far away, someone faceless and dry-palmed in a data vault deep beneath terror, decides you're no longer tactically essential. You aren't dismissed. You're filed, relocated, slotted back into the meat cycle of the Imperial war machine with the mechanical precision of someone reloading a stubber. There is no relief in the moment, no exhale, only redirection. Rest is an operation. The Administratum does not issue comfort, it allocates stasis. Orders move downward through strata of command. Off-world schedules routed through Munitorum data looms, passed by scribe drones, approved by war masters, and locked into cogitator grid logistics weeks before a single guardsman ever feels the ground shift beneath his boots. When those boots do move, it's not to safety. It's to a different kind of peril. Relocation isn't reprieve. It's reassignment with lower munitions usage. If you're lucky, you're posted to a rearward hab crater, a dead manufactorum, or a shrine district hollowed out in the first week of siege. You're told to patrol. You're issued rations with slightly less mold. You sleep near static-pocked Vox relays that haven't worked in months. If you're not lucky, your rest means waiting in orbit, packed into a resupply bulk lifter with cracked pressure seals, where the only warmth comes from engine radiation bleeding through plasteel. You drink salt-thick hydration gel. You sleep in shifts. You dream of noise, because silence feels like death now. The guard doesn't rotate for mercy, it rotates to prevent collapse. Everything is designed around maintaining operational rhythm. Kill counts drop, swap them out. Vox patterns show erratic response times. Reassign. Medici logs too many stimulant doses. Remove, recalibrate, return. Fatigue is measured in numbers. If your body breaks down inside the margin of tolerance, you're moved. If you fall outside that range, you're processed. What's left gets sent forward again. Some regiments receive Rearline reassignments. These look like patrols through ghost cities, guarding logistics convoys, or standing sentry in war zones where the enemy has already fled. No one tells you what happened to the last regiment posted there. You find their tags under rubble. You don't ask. Other times, you're rotated into long-haul void deployment. Not because you need time, because someone else needs space. That's how you end up drifting through the cold between stars, locked in with 1,000 other soldiers and the smell of recycled air, waiting to be thawed out for the next assault. Your bones ache from nothing. Your lungs forget what unfiltered oxygen feels like. You stop looking at clocks. You stop checking names. And if you're a little more important, if your record holds, or your CO has leverage, you might be assigned recovery in a formal station. But even that's a gamble. Official recuperation centers are not places of healing, they're filters. Built into fortress worlds and orbital platforms, these centers test for utility. You're given a bunk, a robe, an assessment slate that asks whether you still believe in the God Emperor. If you hesitate, they watch your hands. If you cry during indoctrination, they flag your file. If you talk in your sleep, they assign you to cleaning detail. Some are returned to duty, some vanish between med checks, some are placed in shock trooper divisions and never spoken to again. The rest are sent to labour units, penal regiments, sub-level service. You don't get a say, you get a barcode and a number. And if your number is called, it doesn't mean you're free, it means you're functional again. There are other kinds of respite. Informal, unspoken. A cogitator outage halts deployment for 27 hours. A transit ship runs out of fuel cell coolant and has to reroute. A planetary governor issues a temporary ceasefire to observe a local saint's day. These delays aren't officially classified as downtime, but for the guardsmen caught inside them, they become sacred. You find a warm corner behind a damaged basilisk. You play cards with munition stamps, You sip contraband amasec from an empty ration tube. You remember the name of someone you saw die 3 years ago, and you say it under your breath just to hear your own voice. No one calls it rest. No one names it. Because if you speak it aloud, someone might notice. And then it ends. Fleet units live under a different rhythm. If you're deployed on voidships between planetary operations, downtime exists in shadows. The holds are filled with ship size and red lumen glow. You sleep in stacked bunks beside plasma coil vents, listening to the Geller field hum like a heartbeat. Tech priests patrol the corridors in silence. Every third night, you hear screaming through the ductwork. You're told it's the machine spirits dreaming. You keep quiet. You drill. You wait. Some guardsmen love this time. It feels clean, suspended. There's no mud, no screaming, no flares, just metal and silence. Others go mad from it. They begin scratching prayers into the walls, start whispering into deactivated vox beads. They request redeployment before their minds curdle under the weight of stillness. Not because they want to fight again, but because they've forgotten what peace is supposed to sound like. There's a truth hidden in all of this. The Astra Militarum does not believe in rest the way we do. It does not value quiet for its own sake. It sees stillness as opportunity. The moment you stop firing, you can be reassigned, repurposed, reconfigured. The second you let your shoulders drop, you are analysed for structural failure. And yet, inside this machine, in all its cruelty and necessity, small moments flicker like dying lumens. A broken regiment sets up a makeshift choir. A survivor paints regimental colours on the side of an abandoned chimera. A guardswoman with one eye and 3 fingers teaches her squad how to play dice using teeth pulled from her own mouth. Not because they want to remember who they were, because it's the only way to survive what they've become. No soldier in the field sees the machine that governs their fate. No cogitator banks, no vox logic chains, no administratum clerk hunched beneath lumen flicker, scribing kill counts into a parchment so long it must be wound by servo arm. They hear a command barked through the static. They move. But the signal came from somewhere deeper, somewhere older. The Imperium does not rest because it cares. It rests because the machine demands tempo. Everything begins in the Munitorum. Not the upper tiers, the ones that burn saints' names into campaign titles and approve crusade fleets for broadcast across the noosphere. The real work is done in the sub-levels. The thousands of strata beneath, where quill servitors are chained to logic thrones, where scribes' fingers rot from ink corrosion, and where endless streams of operational data are ingested, cross-referenced, and spat back out as life or death scheduling orders. You do not request R&R in the Astra Militarum. You are assigned it by equation. Regiments are reduced to algorithmic profiles. Tithe value, casualty rate, supply draw, melee to ranged kill ratios. Cogitator behavior forecasts for probable morale collapse. These numbers are fed into data looms operating on predictive protocols laid down millennia ago, half of them corrupted, half sanctified by the Adeptus Mechanicus as divinely stabilized. When the equation tips too far, a flag is raised. Your unit is marked recalibration advised. You're not even called tired, you're tagged anomalous. Then the Vox order comes down. No context, no reason, just recoordinates, movement assignments, requisition slips. A guardsman on the ground doesn't know why the shelling stops. He doesn't know why the Commissar pulls him from Overwatch, or why the platoon's Chimera suddenly reverses course mid-advance. He's told the mission has shifted. But what shifted was the probability slope. The calculus moved, and that was enough. The system is old. It predates the current Imperium in parts. Some logic engrams still carry high Gothic protocols from the Unification Wars. Others were written in the early days of the Great Crusade and retrofitted with chains of machine spirit stabilization after the heresy shattered cohesion across segmentum command structures. There are recovery loops that activate once every 10,000 rotor cycles. Most scribes don't know what they're for. They execute them anyway. To question the data is to insult the Emperor's will. Behind every battlefield lull is a stack of order slates, signed in blood or ink or verification glyph. Entire Divisio commands rise and fall based on whether a planetary governor reported accurate medical attrition rates. A decimal off, one extra digit in the field hospital logs, and a regiment marked for combat rotation might be pulled for recovery, while another bleeds dry waiting for relief that never comes. These aren't mistakes. They're inertia. The machine cannot see. It can only continue. And it does. Fleet transport for resting regiments is also managed through these channels. The Navy doesn't like to divert assets. Every escort mission strains the Strategium's planning networks. So transport allocations are optimized to the microsecond, mapping warp path reliability against unit decay probability. If your regiment's exhaustion index is rising, but the warp tide forecast for the next 3 weeks is unstable, you don't get rotated. Your rest is denied by spatial anomaly. And when the tides stabilize and your numbers have dropped low enough, you might finally be authorized for evacuation. But the ship won't wait if the dock is missed, and it doesn't come back. Medikey logs feed directly into these systems. Pain suppressant usage, limb loss trends, suicide reports, and even dream fragment logs from sanctioned psychers are integrated into morale prediction overlays. The machine spirits compare current metrics against prior campaigns. When matches are found, when your unit begins to echo the psychological collapse curve of, say, the Calth 17th during the Gorgo campaign, you are flagged for rest. Not because you're human, because history says you're about to break. Psi Division also watches the system. They don't intervene, but they monitor. Quietly. If too many units begin to destabilize in a given sector, if whispers of apostasy rise above ambient vox noise, or if dreams ripple into shared hallucinations, the black ships arrive. No one calls it rest, but your regiment is no longer listed, and your ship disappears from the manifest. Sometimes absence is the only recalibration the system can afford. This is the hidden machine. This is what keeps the Astra Militarum turning. It does not pulse with warmth. It does not reason. It rotates regiments like servo pistons, bleeding pressure until the barrel cools and can fire again. And from the outside, it all looks clean, smooth, efficient. A guardsman rests, a transport arrives, a new platoon deploys, the gear turns, the war continues. But underneath, buried in the rotting cogitator stacks and the half-sane logic loops, the entire system is built on a simple truth. The Imperium never had enough soldiers, so it taught itself how to recycle them. The Munitorum doesn't know these moments exist. They're not logged, not calculated. They don't fit into the rotation diagrams. They don't appear in casualty reports. These moments don't start with an order. They begin with the sound of nothing. A still wind, no incoming shells, no shouted vox, just a silence that feels too fragile to name. And in that breath, some soldiers start to live again, quietly, cautiously, like criminals in the night. These are the moments they steal. A trooper pulls a cracked picked slate from his belt pouch, wipes blood off the screen, and looks at a single frozen image of a home he'll never return to. Another cracks open a field ration not issued to him, adding a pinch of smuggled spice from a dead comrade's pouch, savouring the flavour like it's treason. One more lights a low stick off a still-burning wreck and sits on a piece of shattered ceramite, watching nothing happen. No one speaks, not for a while. Because if you speak, it might break the spell. There's no system for this, no doctrine. These rituals are passed through units like viruses, quiet, unrecorded, surviving only because they're forgotten by the command chain. Dice made from old bolt casings. A bottle of Amasec passed silently from hand to hand. Improvised decks of playing cards scrawled onto picked recording negatives. They don't call it rest. They don't call it anything. They just do it. Because if they don't, they forget what breathing feels like when you're not about to die. They're not supposed to have time for this. Every second off the line is supposed to be used for gear inspection, tactical debriefs, trench repairs, comms reorientation, or doctrinal reiteration sermons led by the local ministorum. But everyone looks the other way. Even commissars. Especially commissars. Because even the most zealous servant of the Emperor knows that a lasgun in the hands of a man who's lost the will to blink is just dead weight on the transport. Some moments go further. A guardsman finds a stray felinid creature in a collapsed hab stack. He feeds it protein paste for 4 days, never naming it, never showing anyone. It sleeps in his helmet when he's on watch. When redeployment orders come, he kills it himself. He doesn't want it to starve. He doesn't want it to follow him. He doesn't want to remember it later. There are soldiers who sketch battlefields they walked 3 weeks earlier, not because they care about the layout, but because it helps them remember where the dead are. Others sew thread into their flak armor, not for decoration, but to mark every comrade lost, every drop of blood, every order they didn't follow. Some start writing, some stop speaking. One trooper from the 34th Varden Shock was found in a trench holding the same sentence carved into his thigh with a bayonet. I am still here. I am still here. I am still here. When asked what it meant, he said he was trying to make it true. These moments don't make you stronger. They don't reinforce morale. They don't inspire heroism. They're not about belief. They're about retention, about keeping some small ember lit somewhere behind the eyes, so when the shells start again, you remember that you are more than the uniform. That beneath the flak and the rank and the indoctrination, there's something that still resists becoming part of the machine, even if only for 5 minutes, even if only for the length of a half-smoked low stick. Officers know this. They don't talk about it. But the smart ones, those who've survived more than 2 campaigns, they let it happen. They extend inspections by 10 minutes and forget to call formation. They dismiss prayer cycles early. They order patrols through sectors they know are already cleared. They're not shirking duty. They're preserving function, because a dead man can't hold a lasgun and a shattered one shoots in the wrong direction. Sometimes, entire squads synchronize. Not officially. Not planned. Just something in the tension breaks at the same time, and an unspoken truce ripples out from one man to another. Helmets come off, weapons get set down, barrels facing dirt. Someone starts humming an off-world hymn, another one joins. Soon half the unit is whispering a song they don't remember learning. And then a vox cracks to life, and the spell dies. They suit back up, they march. No one records these events. The Munitorum doesn't even know they happen, which is the only reason they still exist. Because if someone tried to regulate them, if they became doctrine, they'd be purged, standardized, reduced to schedules and tick box compliance. And then they'd lose what makes them matter, that they are chosen. A guardsman does not live long, not in any theatre. But these moments extend something, some internal tether that keeps their mind from snapping loose and floating away. They don't pray during them. They don't speak of the Emperor. They don't write home. They simply are. And in a galaxy where every second of existence is owed, taxed, regulated, and spent in the name of survival, that's rebellion enough. It doesn't start with fear. It starts with silence. No mortars, no orders, no vox static or screamed corrections. Just a kind of pressureless pause, the kind that creeps in without announcement, like moisture into flak fibre. The kind that doesn't feel earned, doesn't feel safe, it just arrives, and the human mind, so conditioned by terror and velocity, begins to flinch under its absence. This is the battle they never train for. You can only be shot at for so long before your body stops distinguishing the spaces in between. The adrenal machinery, the lizard parts of the brain sharpened by generations of war, keep firing long after the last shell lands. A guardsman will stand in total silence and still feel like he's under bombardment because his muscles don't believe in peace anymore. Stillness becomes unbearable. Veterans have names for it. The crawl, echo sickness, post-howl, some whisper of the empty emperor, a quiet god that only visits when the shooting stops. They speak his name with more fear than the enemy's. At least the enemy can be shot back at. There's nothing to shoot at in your own head. Some symptoms are simple. Sleeplessness, tremors, guard fatigue, eyes that won't focus. But then come the others. The ones harder to write off. Laughing at nothing. Freezing in the middle of speech. Sudden acts of violence during non-critical moments. Disassociation. Silence that stretches too long even among the quiet ones. These aren't breakdowns. They're bleed-through. Battle stress echoing forward like ghosts from yesterday. Drill abbots and Medicaid crews do what they can. They administer stim injections, mood flatteners, and memory suppressant cocktails. They increase exercise quotas. Some even hold burn rituals where soldiers are permitted to incinerate a personal item, often a letter or keepsake, to symbolically discharge emotional residue. The rituals don't always work. One guardsman burned a pict of his wife. 2 hours later, he attacked a servitor, screaming that it had her eyes. Command tracks the numbers. The Munitorum doesn't call them trauma cases. The official term is cognitive destabilization due to overextended lull period exposure. It's an inefficiency, an equipment malfunction, something to be measured and addressed through rotation quotas. But quotas aren't solutions. Sometimes they pull a unit too late. Sometimes not at all. Sometimes the quiet claims a man whole, turns him inside out from the soul up, and leaves behind a breathing shell with a rifle and no memory of his own name. He still fights, but no one wants to stand next to him. Commissars are the other line of defense. Their presence alone quells most descent into madness, not because they heal, because they remind every soldier that insanity is not permitted. That fear will be punished. That hesitation, disobedience, or public grief will be met with a bolt round through the temple. Some call it cruel, others call it mercy, but all agree it keeps the line intact. But there are cases even a commissar won't touch. A soldier who hasn't blinked in 4 hours. A Vox operator who won't stop humming the same note. A trooper who reacts to silence by clenching their weapon so hard their hands bleed. They aren't insubordinate, they're broken. And if they're still functional, they're left alone, deployed in positions where their presence won't infect others, where their silence can become part of the scenery. This isn't abandonment, it's containment. Occasionally, entire squads break under the weight of the quiet. Not all at once, not with screaming or blood, but slowly, over days of inactivity. They stop cleaning their gear, stop answering roll call. They eat, but without purpose. Patrols become aimless walks. When battle returns, they fight poorly, sluggish, confused, as if the war has become unreal. When command notices, they're reassigned, sometimes broken up and redistributed, sometimes sent to training colonies to mentor new recruits, a euphemism that means expire out of sight. The Imperium does not retire soldiers, it moves them until they stop moving. Faith can help. In many regiments, it's the only thing that does. Ministorum preachers intensify their presence during these lulls. Sermons triple in frequency. Litanies of protection are shouted through loudhailers at sunrise. Some even march through the Hab ruins with incense burners and plasma-purified icons, chanting reminders of divine duty and imperial wrath. Not every soldier listens, but those who do seem to survive longer, not because the Emperor saves them, because belief gives the silence shape, and fear is easier to bear when it has a name. There are rare stories, unverified, whispered from campaign to campaign, of regiments who learned to master the quiet, who used those moments of stillness to become something more than human. The Valthari line, the Solaceborn, the Eighth Veiled Light. They say these units could march for weeks without orders, without speech, communicating only through breath and glance, that they could sit in the dark for hours without twitching, waiting, never doubting, never losing themselves, that they turned the silence into a weapon. But those are just stories, and no one remembers what happened to them. Because the quiet doesn't share, it devours. Camaraderie is not luxury, it's insulation, pressed against the cold steel of unending war. There are no vacations in the Guard, no sabbaticals, no furloughs, only pauses. And in those pauses, warmth doesn't come from heat. It comes from proximity, from breath fogging inside helmets, from fingers brushing in ration lines, from the soft sound of another man sleeping beside you, not dead. Regiments build their own languages, not words, but patterns. How someone shifts when they lie down. The cadence of steps on ferrocrete. How long someone chews before swallowing. You start to map the people around you like terrain, because they are terrain. They are what you navigate to feel safe, or at least not alone. Some units sleep in clusters, not for orders, but for need. 4 men to a tent, 6 curled beneath a tarp. 1 man posted, 1 man reading a crumpled note for the 50th time, the rest pretending not to listen. They don't speak of love. Not here. Not out loud. But it exists, pressed thin like pages in a war journal. Glances that last too long. A hand steadying a shoulder with no injury. Shared amasec rations traded silently for comfort rather than calories. Affection becomes code. Code becomes rhythm. Rhythm becomes survival. Flame units sometimes strip down between deployments, not for repair, but to pass clothing between them. Heat lingers in fabric. Warmth passed like contraband, stitching moments together with thread and human friction. A trooper wears another's flat coat because it smells like someone who didn't scream when they died. A pair of boots gets shared between patrols. One man pretends a scarf was always his. No one calls it bonding. That's a civilian word. Here they call it carrying. Because when you wear someone else's gear, you carry them with you. There are rituals, quiet and territorial. Some squads chant the names of the dead before sleeping. Others carve marks into the ferrocrete of wherever they've been stationed, like dogs scenting a post no one else will return to. A few hoard trinkets, wedding rings from burnt corpses, fragments of regimental banners, buttons, teeth, not for trophies, for memory anchors. If you remember something, you haven't dissolved yet. Amasec rituals are sacred in certain divisions. The 41st Dravian holds silent wakes before redeployment, everyone pouring out one capful, drinking it slow, then burning the cup. The Mordian Irregulars tattoo tiny hashes on their inner forearms after each campaign, then black out the ones who didn't make it. Some take low sticks from fallen comrades, light them, and leave them to burn out untouched. A final breath without lungs. Laughter becomes rationed. When it surfaces, it startles. A joke muttered in the wrong tone might trigger a commissar's suspicion. Humour is rarely safe, but it's also a test. If someone can still laugh at the state of their boots, or the smell of the latrine pit, or the way their vox op sings off-key, then something human remains. And if that humanity survives long enough, bonds form. And if bonds form, the next time someone screams for help, someone else answers without thinking. This is how squads survive what Medici can't measure. Romance isn't forbidden, it's ignored. If two guardsmen sleep beside each other more often than not, no one asks. If someone carries extra ammo for someone else every patrol, it's not questioned. If a trooper is found crying over a bloodied helmet and can't explain why, no one presses. This isn't about policy, it's about capacity. The guard cannot afford to care what shape closeness takes, only that it holds. But not all intimacy is soft. Some of it is violent, unstructured, desperate. In high turnover regiments, friction becomes normal. Shouting matches in the barracks over nothing. Fistfights over who gets to sit closer to the heater coil. Soldiers lashing out not to hurt, but to feel impact. Some officers allow it. Better they strike each other now than freeze later. It becomes a kind of pressure valve, a bloodletting of fear. And then there are the silent ones, the ones who don't connect, who don't bond, who sleep alone when possible, speak only when ordered, and walk with their eyes half closed, as if already dreaming of a place where the war never started. These soldiers are not broken. They are beyond the need for others. No one envies them. No one mourns them. They are marked not by death, but by its absence. Sometimes, despite every measure, a squad fractures. Bonds that once held become liabilities. Someone is caught looting the dead. Someone else sabotages a ration list. Paranoia spreads like a data plague. The warmth becomes poison, and the cracks never seal again. When this happens, regiments dissolve squads entirely, members reassigned, names changed. In extreme cases, commissars perform memory scrubs sanctioned by attached psychers. Better a blank slate than a corrupt one. But for those who endure, who build something in the silence and share it across the gulf of trauma, those moments last. They might not survive the next campaign, but for now, they'll know someone else is watching their back. Not because the handbook says to, because someone cares whether they come back. And in the Imperium, that's rarer than peace. They call themselves the first and only. Tanith, the lost world. Tanith, the forest planet burned before it could fight. Tanith, the memory now carried not in geography, but in breath, in story, in ritual. The men of Gaunt's ghosts do not retreat to a homeland. They carry it on their backs, sewn into fatigues, whispered into songs that no one else sings. This is what rest looks like when you have nowhere to return to. Downtime for the ghosts is never clean. It's jagged, incomplete. Something you circle like a wounded animal, afraid to step too close in case it disappears. Their world is one long campaign with breaks measured in memory instead of time. Ghostmaker doesn't show rest as comfort. It shows it as exposure. When the last fire fades and the trench lines go quiet, what remains isn't peace. It's the sound of thought rising to fill the void. And for men who've buried everyone they ever knew, thought is the true enemy. They cope in fragments. Corbeck, half drunk on duty, muttering jokes no one else finds funny, but everyone clings to anyway. Rawn, sharpening his hate against the walls, trying to carve a future out of spite alone. McCall, silent in his corner, half spirit, half sentinel. Larkin, twitching with ghosts that never left him. Bragg, smiling too wide, too long, like he's trying to outlast the decay with optimism alone. They don't rest, they unravel, but they do it near each other, and somehow that's enough. There's a bunkhouse scene. Not dramatic, not loud. Just quiet men in partial armour, bootlaces undone, the flicker of lumen sticks overhead barely pushing back the dark. They talk, not about the war, about old music, about forest trails no one else remembers. One of them hums. It's off-key. They let it ride. Nobody's laughing, nobody's weeping. They're just there, breathing. That's what makes them ghosts. Sometimes they find shelter on starships, rear echelon flotillas, where the air recycling system doesn't scream and the recaf doesn't taste like ash. Kane's novels speak of fleet-based rest as sanitized, almost surreal. For the ghosts, it's a kind of limbo. Too clean, too quiet. They don't trust it. It's not their world. They sneak off patrol, find empty holds, practice drills they don't need to keep their blood warm. They don't disarm. They don't sleep all at once. Even in orbit, they're deployed. Gaunt watches them differently. He's not a general in the traditional mould. Not just a commissar either. He's their tether. The last piece of Tanith still walking. His presence in their downtime matters more than his orders. When he's near, the ghosts find alignment. When he's gone, fractures begin to show. There's a scene in Necropolis, a rare moment. Gaunt sits beside Larkin, says nothing, just listens to him talk about fear like it's a disease he's learned to live with. No sermons, no motivation, just listening. It's not a cure. But Larkin stops shaking for a while. This is the shape of downtime among the Tanith. No formal barracks, no sermons, no lectures on doctrine, just bodies huddled under cloaks, stories traded like ration bars, the slow pacing of sentries who never fully trust the silence. They watch the night like it's about to be stolen again, and sometimes it is. When the ghosts rest, they do so with their backs to walls. Not superstition, habit. Learned from the first time the sky caught fire above Tanith, and they realized safety was something that could be turned off like a lumen globe. They sleep with blades near fingers. They eat fast. They don't waste warmth. Some of them sing in their sleep. Others scream. Most just breathe heavy and uneven, as if their lungs are still catching up from the last war. They've developed customs. When one of them has a dream, they tell no one until morning. If it's remembered, it's written down and placed in a sealed pouch. Every 3 campaigns, those pouches are burned. Not for secrecy, for cleansing. The act of releasing what they can't bear to carry. A kind of emotional exorcism. They mourn the dead every 4 battles. Not before, never after. 4 is the number, because it's how many they lost in the first patrol after the fall. No one explains this. It's just done. Some of their rest is spent hunting. Not enemies, but memories. Retracing steps. Carving names into walls. Claiming spaces with presence alone. If the administratum assigns them a rest zone, they change the name, never accept the designation. Every place they sleep becomes Tanith for as long as they stay. Then they leave, and the name goes with them. No other regiment does this. No other regiment can. The ghosts are the only survivors of a lost culture that never got to die properly. Every breath they take during rest is an act of cultural resistance. Every shared ration, every whispered lullaby, every grim joke is a rebellion against extinction. And they know it. They don't call themselves heroes. They don't pretend to be saints. But when the downtime comes, when the fire dims and the war pulls back, they don't collapse. They remember, they whisper, they breathe, and in a galaxy that's trying to erase everything not nailed to stone, that is power enough. There is no sound in the void. Not really. Only the ship's artificial heartbeat, the low thrum of reactor cores, the rustle of uniforms in narrow corridors. A guardsman stationed aboard a naval transport doesn't experience silence the way soldiers on the ground do. It's not the absence of noise, it's the absence of place. On the surface, there's dirt, blood, smoke, something to stand on, die in. Up here, it's just distance, and distance has its own gravity. Void transit is a different kind of rest, not granted, inflicted. A period of stasis imposed by astronavigation, warp path calculations, and fleet logistics. There are no wars to fight between stars, only waiting. Long coiled stretches of non-combat filled with systems checks and second-hand breathing. You don't recover, you hold. Aboard transport vessels, guardsmen are stacked in ranks tighter than logistics allow. Sleep rotation is staggered. Half-conscious cycles, heads resting against rifles, boots tied to anchor points so no one slips during artificial gravity lurches. Some don't sleep at all, not because they're afraid, because they don't know how to stop anymore. Medici stations reek of sealant and copper. Recaf is issued in blocks, not cups. Shower cycles are rationed to 10 seconds. The cogitator that assigns latrine access runs 6 hours behind actual need. You eat, you wait, you are called. Kane once described these moments as eternities in vacuum-sealed coffins, and he wasn't exaggerating. During warp travel, even time fractures. Soldiers report dreams that don't end when they wake. Others wake in the middle of someone else's dream. A few wake speaking languages they've never learned. You're told it's stress, or the warp, or both. No one looks into it further. Psychers are forbidden from speaking during transit, not silenced by order, silenced by practice. When they speak, the walls listen. Geller field anomalies spike. Auspexes go blind. A sanctioned psyker humming to himself in a corridor once caused the ship's machine spirit to lock every airlock for 9 minutes. No one died, but everyone remembered. Now, psychers walk in silence, and no one meets their eyes. The only comfort is routine. Wake, drill, clean your weapon, wait, attend liturgy, recite the oaths, wait, eat, drill again. Sleep if you can, most don't. Some loop their fingers through belts or flak straps just to feel connected to someone, anything. The emptiness between bodies becomes unbearable, so they stay touching, just barely. It's not affection, it's anchoring. Not all ships are equal. The better ones, Crusade-class carriers, heavy lifters with full naval complement, have rec halls, small chapel alcoves, shared vox booths for transmitting messages home. These luxuries are rare, and when available, dangerous. Too much time in chapel, and you might start asking why you're being sent to die on a planet you've never heard of. Too long on a vox call, and the line might pick up something breathing from the other side. Better to ration hope like rations, tightly, without indulgence. Most guardsmen stick to routines, some develop fixations. One soldier spent 6 weeks tracing every bolt in the ceiling grid with his finger, recording the pattern into a prayer scroll he never finished. Another refused to leave her bunk except for drills. She counted her breaths out loud to keep the ship's pulse from overriding her own. A third tore apart the same piece of deck plating every cycle and rebuilt it with micro adjustments until he claimed it would be safe. He was never told what from. There are no windows, no stars, nothing to look at but lumen-lit corridors and the faces of men and women you'll either die beside or forget. And when the Geller field flickers, even for a moment, everyone stops breathing. Not because something always happens, but because once, something did. The Vox channels pick up static sometimes. Not interference, not crosstalk. Just sound that shouldn't exist. A woman humming a hymn from a sector lost 3 centuries ago. A child calling for her mother in dialect no one speaks anymore. The sound of gunfire. Screaming. A voice that speaks your name the way only a dead sibling ever did. Vox techs are trained not to react. Some still do. They're reassigned, or buried. Commissars on these ships don't talk much. Their presence is enough. A bolt pistol visible in the dim. A prayer token tied to a data slate. Some give lectures during shipboard assemblies. Most don't bother. There's no one to inspire here. Just bodies to keep in formation. And when someone breaks, screams, weeps, refuses to stand, they're removed with quiet efficiency. No drama, just subtraction. Because even here the rhythm cannot break. Some soldiers find peace in the void. It's rare. They speak less, breathe slower, begin moving like ship crew instead of groundmen. One even began referring to himself by number alone. When asked why, he said names were for planets, and they weren't going to planets anymore. He was right. His ship misjumped, never arrived. That number's still on the manifest. For most, it's purgatory. A limbo lined with ceramite and recycled air. And when the transport finally shudders, when the light shifts and the ship begins to slow, the silence breaks with ritual. Weapons unlocked. Helmets sealed. Orders barked. The waiting ends not with joy, but with dread. Because rest in the void is a lie, and its ending is the only truth. Some wars don't end. They don't erupt or conclude or collapse. They sink, slowly, until everything becomes mud, metal, and waiting. There are no advances, no retreats, just years of trench rot, static defense, and the ever-thinning line between soldier and corpse. Vraks was one of those wars. 17 years, millions dead. No decisive moment, no final stand, just erosion of strategy, of sanity, of meaning. The death corps of Krieg were rotated through its trenches, not to fight for victory, but to delay defeat indefinitely. Rest didn't come in hours or days. It came in reduced shelling, in half-collapsed dugouts that hadn't been gassed yet, in minutes between barrages when the sky flickered instead of screamed. When there's no movement, the body becomes the battlefield. Lung rot, nerve decay, parasitic infestation. Bones crack under the weight of armor worn too long in the same position. Limbs atrophy. Digestion slows. Blood forgets how to circulate without adrenaline. Some soldiers dig their own graves just to sleep in them. There are no barracks in campaigns like this. No defined safe zones. You sleep where you fall, or where your commanding officer tells you to, which is often a sump trench filled with ankle-deep filth and the half-eaten remains of a servitor unit that wandered off and collapsed. Medicae stopped tracking non-lethal injuries after the 3rd year. There are only 2 categories left, functional or burial detail. Vraks is not unique. Armageddon, Talon, Grya, Kalth, hive worlds that burned so long their fires became geography. Dead worlds turned meat grinders, attrition warfare without pause or pivot. In these campaigns, rest becomes bureaucratic. You're issued a rest code, a number that correlates to your rotation. When your number's up, you're allowed 6 hours in a rear trench or Habspire base. You spend 2 of those walking there, 1 waiting in line, 1 pretending to eat, 1 trying to sleep, 1 walking back. You return exactly as broken, but now there's paperwork confirming it. The administratum doesn't account for collapse. When logistical maps show no change for months, rotation slow, supply lines stagger, replacement troops don't arrive in full. Rest becomes a superstition. Something the older soldiers speak of in fragments, like a relic once shown and then lost. Some don't believe in it anymore. Others treat it as prophecy. Behavior mutates. A platoon assigned to Sector 5-34 on Vraks stopped speaking entirely for 6 weeks, not as punishment, as choice. Orders were delivered via hand signals and written slate. Casualty rates dropped. Productivity increased. No one ever explained why. When the unit was reassigned, it disbanded within days. Some joined other squads. Some went silent forever. A few were found whispering orders to themselves in empty hab voids, long after their platoon had been dissolved. Lulls in combat stretch into madness. When the enemy stops firing, the mind begins to rot. Soldiers invent threats, imagine gunfire. Some hallucinate entire battles. Others begin reenacting drills in their sleep, whispering command codes from campaigns fought decades ago. A lone trooper on Grya once dug a perfect trench for 19 days straight, no orders, no companions. When found, he claimed his regiment was stationed inside the trench and refused to believe otherwise. When pressed, he wept, but continued digging. His hands never stopped. Command compensates in strange ways. Battle hymns played over Vox networks. Inspirational pict feeds projected onto trench walls. Servitor units programmed to tell jokes or recite passages from the Lectitio Divinitatus during mealtime. In one campaign, a Ministorum preacher was assigned to march through the ranks reciting every known Imperial victory chronologically. He made it 5 years before being shot by a guardsman who claimed the voice was eating his bones. No charges were filed, supplies degrade, morale frays. Weapons rust faster than they're fired. Commanding officers vanish or turn to autopilot, functioning on doctrine alone, their voices hollow, their decisions clockwork precise and soul-dead. Some regiments hold rituals not for the dead, but for those still standing. They say the names of the survivors out loud, one by one, just to prove they haven't vanished too. You learn to find rest in absurdity, a last battery that didn't overload, a flak plate that deflected around instead of catching fire, a letter that arrived, late by 6 years, but arrived, a moment where no one screamed, a breath that didn't rattle, a bowel movement not tainted by plague. These are the miracles you learn to count, and when you count enough, you forget that real miracles once meant anything else. The silence between battles becomes louder than the shelling ever was. Time slows, thought loops, and the enemy becomes abstract, a concept, something that once meant something, now reduced to distant flashes on a ridge you haven't moved from in 14 months. You forget why you're here, but you remember the shape of the mud under your knees. You remember the taste of powdered protein. You remember the sound of the trooper beside you breathing, and you hold to that, because it's the only thing that doesn't dissolve. There is no word for peace in High Gothic that doesn't imply defeat. Even in the sacred tongue of the Imperium, rest is suspect, an interval, not a destination. Stillness is what happens before you are judged. Quiet is the sound you hear before the Mechanicus charges your remains into the soil to fuel the next campaign. In the Ecclesiarchy, they don't speak of recovery. They speak of trial. The body, broken by war, is not something to be healed. It is something to be sanctified. Pain is the tithe you pay for continued breath. A torn ligament is a flag. Burned scars are sigils. If you return from the front with your limbs intact, the chaplains speak of spiritual debt. If you return with none, they call it absolution. You are forgiven for surviving only if you bleed enough to make survival look like sacrifice. Within Shrine World infirmaries and cathedral habs turned field hospitals, recovery is liturgical. Medici do their work beneath stained ceramite arches, treating bone splinters and gut wounds beside altars crusted with wax and promethium soot. Every injection is a benediction. Every suture thread pulled tight like a rosary bead. The Emperor sees you. He sees your weakness. And if he does not strike you down, it must mean you are still useful. That's the highest praise there is. Wounded soldiers are arranged not by triage, but by category of endurance. The ones who scream are put closest to the altar, because at least they still believe in something. The silent ones go to the corners, watched closely. A man who feels nothing is more dangerous than one who weeps. Recovery periods are rarely longer than a week. You are expected to find your faith again faster than your pulse stabilizes. Some regiments formalize it. The Elysian drop troops tattoo their injuries into their thighs. Every line represents a fall survived. Some say they run out of room before they run out of luck. Others keep carving, even after there's no skin left. The Vostroyans braid hair from their lost into cords worn during recovery. If you're strong enough to fight again, you burn the braid. If not, someone burns it for you. The Valhallans recite their death date in advance. Every day they remain under care, a promise to the Emperor. If they don't fulfill it in battle, it becomes their name. The act of healing becomes a campaign. You must prove your strength with every breath, every step, every motion toward better. The Guard doesn't use the term convalescence. It doesn't fit. You don't convalesce from war. You claw your way out of it like a trench too deep for ladders. One hand, then the other. Sometimes teeth. And if you fail, there is no dishonor. But there is removal. You are reassigned, you are repurposed. You are made useful in a way that doesn't require walking. There is a rite among certain regiments. When a soldier returns from the Medicae bay, they are not welcomed. Not immediately. Instead, they are questioned, privately, by their squad mates. Asked to recount what they saw during unconsciousness. What they dreamed while being stitched. What words the Emperor whispered while their blood ran cold. If their answer rings hollow, they are watched more closely. If it rings true, they are brought back in full. No ceremony, no cheers. They're given a seat beside the fire again. That's enough. There are myths that the Emperor himself walks the recovery wards at night. Draped in silence, faceless behind golden light. He does not heal. He observes. Weighs. Some say if he places a hand on your forehead, you will either rise renewed or never rise again. No one has proven this. No one will. But the candles burn longer on those nights. The incense never seems to run out. And those who breathe through cracked ribs in the dark begin to mutter prayers not found in any approved litanies, just in case. Recovery is never without preparation. Weapons maintenance is resumed within hours of consciousness. Muscle memory retraining is handled between pain spikes. You are drilled on doctrine, not anatomy. A soldier who cannot quote the 82nd Infantry Catechism while vomiting blood is considered unfit. Better to die faithful than live in doubt. Some memorize while unconscious, or claim to. It doesn't matter, as long as the chant is spoken when the Vox unit activates again. The Imperium does not celebrate survival, it uses it. You wake because you are needed. You breathe because the Emperor has not chosen someone else to hold your rifle yet. You walk because the floor beneath you hasn't collapsed. You fight again because that is all there is. Rest is not an end, it is a threshold. A point between wounds, a breath before fire. And like all thresholds in this galaxy, it is guarded. There is no sanctuary in recovery, only ceremony, no peace, only pause. And when the bolt of fire returns, it does not wait for your scars to finish sealing. It does not ask if your mind has settled, if your nerves are whole, if your fingers still tremble when holding steel. It only asks whether you can still kill. And if the answer is yes, then your rest is over.